All right. So people are still coming, and in a while we will wait for more people to join us. But already now, I would like to start with a short introduction of organizers and of the speaker. And also, I would like to hear from which countries we have listeners today. So could you just write first the country where you are now and probably the time that in which time zone you are, just to see how from which parts of the world we have people here. England, 8 a.m. Okay, quite early. So we are here in Switzerland. It's 9 a.m. Yes, like Alex in Paris. And our speaker is in Japan, and it is already afternoon. So we have pretty diverse today, pretty diverse time zones. Okay, while you're writing, I will start with a short introduction of InnMind and why we're here. So we are an international platform for startups and investors. We are connecting those who are interested in innovations. And this year we decided to start to give one more way to support startups and entrepreneurs. And like this, we decided to start webinars, to start this type of activity. And for the webinars, we invite the experts from different countries, from different fields, so that they can speak and give you some valuable insights. Speaking now about today's topic. So we are mostly we are concentrating on startups, and lots of startups are connected with technologies. Though not everyone in the team might be like a technical person, CTO or something, but this skill to manage the technical project is really very, very crucial for a startup. So after having lots of questions from our users about managing technical project, about dealing with developers and just organizing the processes, we decided that we need someone who is having a lot of expertise and a lot of experience in this field. And we decided to invite today Frederic who has his own developers company. He is as well a tech investor, so you can, in the end, if we have enough time, you can also ask him some other questions not directly connected with managing tech team, but mostly we will concentrate today on the technical part. So let's begin, and I would like to invite Frederic and give him the ground so that he can start the webinar.
Hello, Katrina. Hello, everyone. Well,
okay, so I'm giving you.
Thanks for. Yeah. Sorry. So hello, everyone. Thanks for participating to this webinar for startups. Where actually I will introduce you to the best practices of software development, and in particular on how to manage your tech team. But first, I'd like to thank Katerina and Ellie from InnMind for inviting me and organizing this webinar. So for those who don't know yet, InnMind is a platform that connects industry experts, mentors, and investors with startups. And I've worked for almost a year with them. They're very dedicated to helping both startups and investors with case studies and expert advisory. And so if you're not yet registered on the platform, I'd recommend you checking out InnMind. And before we jump in, I'd like to mention that this webinar should be as interactive as possible. So please ask questions all along the way, and I'll try to answer them as much as possible. So let's get started. So I'll briefly introduce myself. It doesn't look so brief, but I want you to understand why I'm talking about this topic today on how to manage tech teams for startups, and it has to start a little bit with my background. So I'm born in Lausanne. I've worked in the finance industry for about 10 years. I've been working on setting up operational IT and non-IT teams for mostly strategic projects such as mergers and acquisitions and reorganizations. I have a business degree in business administration and development. I've been also working as a consultant for a portfolio management system company, analyzing financial and data and software performance for the top 10 private banks in Switzerland and the US. In 2009, I moved to Hong Kong and started working on an e-commerce venture selling virtual assets and managing parts of the operations. And today I'm actually located in the Philippines. My ISP is showing Japan IP, but I'm actually in the Philippines where I relocated this first venture. And this is also where in the Philippines I've co-founded Arcanys with a longtime friend of mine, Alan. And today we have about 120 people that are located in the Philippines. We have 80 developers, and we recently founded Arcanys Labs, where we partner with a venture capital firm to invest in startups. So I'll introduce all along the presentation what we do for startups, both with Arcanys and Arcanys Labs, so that you understand a little bit where our experience comes from. So far, we've invested in about 6 startups from Switzerland, the UK, in Thailand, and Australia. We're also mentors in a few accelerator or incubators, such as FinTech Fusion, and I'm also a mentor at the Swiss FinTech Association. And also, we're collaborating with I'm collaborating on one NGO that is active in the Philippines, where we help about 1,500 families every year with early math education. So that's a little bit of my background. So why am I presenting this topic today? So since 2010, that's the date we created Arcanys, we've worked with several hundreds of teams, and we have measured all the different ways teams could actually work more efficiently. We've also witnessed a lot of startups that were bound to fail. And over the years, we've really perfected our model to make sure that we increase the chances of success of any project we're working on. And in recent years, so 2 years ago, we started being so confident about the value we could deliver that we actually invest in startups we believe in, and where we actually know we can make a huge difference in the speed of commercial development of the startup. So we're both investors and providers working for much later payment if the company is successful, or kind of working for free if the company is not, which means we're really willing to take the risk of working along with them to boost their chances of success with no direct payment. For example, one of the startups we've worked with, but we missed the investment in that one. It just recently been sold to $10 million US. And our team at Arcanys is the core of the success, because the team they have with us here is bigger than the one that they have on site in Sweden. And now we're also increasing the collaboration with the company that purchased them, because they always wanted to outsource but failed 3 times, and now we have to prove them that outsourcing can work when we have 2 partners, the provider and the client, that can really work together. And another example is a startup that we have invested in at their very start and have managed to create some traction and also release the product good enough to get funding of $500,000 US from a VC fund called 500 Startups. So that was the Asia fund, and now is valued at above $5 million, which is actually a lot of money compared to the US. First of all, I would like you to tell me a little bit what is your main struggle in your tech today, or what are your questions related to the topic of the webinar today, and maybe the ones that you had that helped you join this webinar. And if you think about any struggles you might have along the way, you could write them in the chat, and Katarina and Nelly will relay the questions to me. And so I will answer them along the way at the end or along the way or at the end of the webinar. Okay, so now let's dig in more details with the topic of the day. So basically, when you work in tech, there are two main things to look after. First one is people, so their roles, the knowledge they have, and how to manage them. And second, the processes where it's about when to use them and how to use them. So I'll basically start with the roles. So in technology, you will see there are lots of different roles. So some of them can be the same person, the ones I've listed here, and but it's not the case for all of them. So I will go through them and explain to you a little bit about what they're all about. So first, let's talk about the graphic designer that does UI, which is your user interface, and UX, which is user experience. So she's the person who will help you define the look and feel of your application for the users and also for the admin parts. Then there's the business analyst. The business analyst will always, will usually work before or together with the designer to work on the requirements and specifications of a project. So the business analyst's role is to understand the process, map them, describe what users need, help the designer, along with, of course, the founders, come up with the features, look and feel of the application. Once the requirements of your application are known, or the additional requirements are known and validated, then this is when the developers come into play. And so we have different kinds of developers, basically. So we have the front-end developer, which is the kind of developer who will program the visible part of the application that users and admins will interact with, while the back-end developer is actually the developer who will take care of the servers and API side, so that where the heavy lifting of the application happens. And a developer that masters both skills, the front-end and the back-end, is called a full-stack developer. And a relatively new term is DevOps. So it's a developer that takes care of the infrastructure and the development, even more so with cloud technologies. So I would say it's a hybrid between a developer and someone who will also understand the infrastructure, which is QA, quality assurance, automation, hardcore cloud or physical server issues, and infrastructure. Then we have the architect, and I will go back to in more details about what the architect should do later down the road. But basically, the architect is a high-level developer that makes software design choices, sets the technical standards, for example, including coding standards and platforms. Usually, this is the role of the CTO in a startup, so this should be the most experienced developer. And so most of the time, we think that a CTO should be a central person and even maybe a co-founder in technology startups. Then there are testers, and those people are usually forgotten, but they have actually a central role to building a product. So because they're like the ones that guarantee the reliability of the software when it's delivered, they're testing applications both on a user point of view and on a technical or performance point of view to make sure the applications are working as expected. I'll get back to that a bit later in more details, but it's important to mention that the best is that the tester is a different person than the developer, simply because it's basically two different jobs and no developer is very good at testing its own code. And in some cases, there's a need for project manager. Again, I will go into more details, but most of the time the role is, at least with us, played by the lead developer. We think that every person in a technological project must be technical, and this is no exception for the project manager. So in lots of projects, the project manager role is adding a layer in a project and is prone to conveying misunderstandings. So we like to have this role blended with the lead developer as long as the team is not too big. I'm just going to look at a little bit at the question. So I have a question from Niraj. It's not really a question; it's a statement, and maybe I can explain this a little bit. Saying that he has, I have zero IT knowledge, and everything I try to get done from a vendor is never what I want. So I think I will go into more details a bit later in the presentation to explain to you and how we can get a provider to do what you want, and then I'll also send you an ebook that will really help you maybe with this initial process, and let's see if it answers your questions, and maybe you could add on this. And so, sorry, I jumped a little bit quick on the questions. I forgot the product owner. And basically, the product owner is a person like Niraj, for example, it's a person who is in charge of the vision of what he wants and what he wants to build, and conveys that vision to the team. And so, in the case of a startup, the product owner is the client or the founder. So that was mostly to introduce the people and roles. Now, I'll quickly jump on the processes, and there are actually a lot of processes to keep in mind. And to give you an example, at Arcanys, we have about 200 people, including on the client side, that are working together at any given time on about 20 projects at the same time. So we can't mess with information at any given time. We need to be in control of our project and really know what is happening at any given time. So we do this on a daily basis. But for a startup, a few simple processes need to be in place just to increase the chances of success, and I'll just go through them. So one of them is managing the requirements properly, and maybe that's the problem of Niraj. The second is understanding how to work and when not to work with a lean software methodology. Another process is estimating the features of a project and the project as a whole to know where you're going. The fourth one is creating an architectural design based on the specifications that you have been given. Fifth is managing the team and the communication. So I'll give you a few tips and tools. And lastly, to never forget testing the software by the user and testers. And so maybe another question for you is, if you are in a tech startup, do you manage all of those processes, or are there some processes you're not following, and maybe is there a specific reason why you don't? And if you are working on these processes, is there struggling with, and what is missing maybe in your execution? So let's jump on the next slide. In the processes, what are the first problems that cause project failure and delays? And this is, I think, again, the real problem of Niraj is the mismanagement of specifications and business requirements from the client end or from the provider end, because it can always be a two-side thing. So in a startup, everything is usually urgent. Everything needs to be done at the same time because there's not so much money, there's a reduced team, and of course you need to build your MVP and ship it as quickly as possible. And usually, regardless of that, when building the technology, there are fast and slow phases, and some things cannot be rushed, even though the pressure to push something out is high, but neglecting requirements is one of the most costly mistakes. And if you head down to programming your product without thinking about the whole picture, it can really be deadly for you. And we know, and we've seen that a lot of, I mean, some founders, not the majority, but some founders have really a hard time to sit down and focus on requirements. And there they have a bit of time, but actually they'd rather write a few lines quickly and ask the tech guy to price estimate or deliver something. And this is not the way to go. Working on the first version of the product is the most important task you have to do, and it's even more important than raising money and finding good clients. It's only when you really have a product that you can actually find clients and look at raising money. Every month we have to dig in projects that have not been well specified, and it's a real nightmare to fix these. So usually it's more costly to try to fix a broken product than to start from scratch. But of course, starting from scratch is then slowing down the release of new features, and in the short term, this can really be a problem when you're facing a competition that is like releasing stuff on the market. So I'll use a little analogy because since it's such an important topic, I want to dig into that a little bit more. And so I think that's an example I always use with my clients is the building a house analogy when you think about building a first project. So we often have clients that come to us with a one-pager, like a word page, and they want to build a normal system, and they just describe it with a 20 line. It kind of looks like the sketch you can see on your screen and on the left of the screen, and they say, hey, how much is it going to take? How much is it going to cost, and how much time is it going to take to build that thing? What do you think? And from this drawing, I'm thinking, does it look like a little hut in the jungle, or does it look a big mansion with a swimming pool that I can't see in the back? And at this stage, it's really in the eyes of the beholder to guess what it really is. So there are really a lot of uncertainties here, and I think whoever is giving a price and a timeline for this sketch is making a big mistake and probably even lying to you. Because if your requirements aren't clear, then you're forcing your developer or your provider to make guesses on your behalf, as well as planning for you and changing your mind all the time until you actually have what you want. And so it pushes you into a messy project that will likely last much longer than you want. And if someone gives you a fixed timeline or even a fixed price, you can expect them to come back later with additional requests in terms of time or payment. So the price will go up and the project will take longer, and if it ever gets released, because also architectural design will have failed because it was not well scoped. And so we've done this mistake at the very beginning, 8-9 years ago, to take projects that were not well defined, and after having worked on hundreds of projects, so we don't work on those projects anymore. We always push our clients to work on these requirements, either by themselves or with an agency that is close to them, or we also can do this with our team. And now I think it's a good time to share the little ebook that I wrote that I think really might be helpful to understand what is needed when you're actually building requirements. So it's the 5 steps to the perfect requirements PDF. And to illustrate that, is when you're building requirements. I wanted to share the link. You can find it in the chat. So basically, when you build your requirements, who do you need? You really need the 3 roles that I'm going to, that are highlighted in this slide. So the designer, obviously, the business analyst, and the product owner. It might not, and sometimes potential user, but I'll go into more details with that in a bit. So it might not really be 3 different people for the graphic designer, the business analyst, and the product owner. because someone can fill two roles at the same time. And other stakeholders can also give their input and share their opinion, but be careful, they should not always be listened to. They might get you lost sometimes. For example, a tester or developer might think of technical problems to building the system and suggest things that make him comfortable or make him avoid things that he might feel too hard to build, rather than think about the best functionality for the user. So you have to be careful. And of course, the first phase is that you should come up with the ideal tool you really want for your users, and then you turn to your developer and ask them how much time they need to build each functionality. In this example, I always think of Apple. So when they build products, they always start from the design perspective, and then they go to the engineers and they say, like, this is what we want, and whatever it takes, you're going to do that. So Apple has a lot of money, and startups need to mitigate this. But basically, you gotta get the team to build you the quickest product you really want. And now, for the next slide, I would like to give you a little example of UI UX design and requirements documents. And you'll see on the left side that a few designs that explain the screens and the functionalities. And if you look well, you can also see there it explains the flows between the screens and the actions for each button. So this is very important to describe to whoever will work on your project. And once the requirements are well done, you should have something like so either wireframes or the final design that you see, but also a written requirements document that describes the business rules and the business logic behind your system. And you can even go a bit deeper and present an interactive prototype. I'm going to show you this in a bit. And so most of the time for us, when we receive requirements, the entire admin section is missing. So this is the section where the company is managing its users, asking for whatever reports that you may want to run your business, and that's an important part that is missing. And usually it's probably the part that takes at least a third of the time to develop, in addition to the front that the users, actually your clients, are going to use. And so this is also explained in the document that just has been shared to explain what you should think about. And so once you have your design and mostly the features that are explained, it's very important to have all the decision makers to agree on the design of your application, at least for the MVP. And this is where I'll get back to the lean software methodology. And in this phase, you probably also want to get feedback from a few prospects, but you also need to be careful with it, because most clients, they don't know too well what they need, and they will ask you for a lot of additional features. And they might not understand the technology, and they can't always imagine themselves using the software. So you might hear a lot of suggestions that sound good, but you also must be extremely careful about scope creep, right? So you need to decline most ideas and stick to core functionality, because you want to ship the product first, and you don't want to wait for too long, because the competition is gonna go faster. And so this is why we say sometimes be careful with the lean software methodology. I think it's usually a very good methodology, but you also want to be very careful about using this for your MVP when you're tight in cash, and basically all startups are. So building the first version of your MVP is when you really need to sort out the design and the requirements and build a product that you can ship and test within your timelines and budget, because budgets are not always extensible, and the competition doesn't really wait for you. And when you have your first product and your first users, this is when you can work more easily on the fast iteration about your product without necessarily planning too much about the next features. And so this might help you get a better product, especially if you have a strong adherence to the principles of the lean software methodology, and you also manage to get rapid customer feedback. And this is extremely important for you to do so. And we've seen it happen with a few customers who are not that disciplined in various areas, and if we didn't put them back on track, they could have maybe doubled their budget for the MVP with a lot of stuff developed for nothing, then trashed, and when they change their mind. And a good way to get validation is maybe to integrate the design in prototyping tools. They don't require any coding, and they give a feel of the use of the application without coding anything. So those are the two types of tools we use for our projects. And I'm going to read a question from Vinko, who says, I'm a non-tech founder and CEO. Even I have tech founders with me, but I will need to have deeper knowledge on the development processes at team management. As well, we will be developing products for big companies. I need to be able to know where the real boundaries of the tech. Developers would like to work on some problems for a long time, but this is bad for the project and might not work in the end. As I need to be able to promise and deliver the customers, big companies, I need a good way to control where the development problem is realistic and the question of time, and where is the problem unrealistic. Even this should be done by the tech founder sometimes. I need to control him too in his case. As my position is to oversee the whole process, I still need to see how to put a good check and balance method so that as a non-tech founder I can use without employing other outside people of the company, I guess. Okay, so this is a very interesting question. Basically, is from the non-technical co-founder, how do I manage the time that is allocated to develop new features, and when can I ship those features, and tell the client when they can expect to get a product on the way and start making money. And for that, I will jump on the next slide, which will probably answer your question. If you have some more questions, then Vinko, you can let me know. And so this is an extremely important process that most developers hate, and of course then they usually and unfortunately skip this step. But this is why you actually go into important project delays between what is expected and what really happens. So we need to estimate the development time of a project or features. And basically it's like, if you don't do this, it's basically telling your friend that you'll meet them at point B at a given time, but you don't even bother checking how to get there because you've never done it, and no one ever has, how much time it will take, or if there is traffic or not, and worse, how you're going to go there, like train, bus, walking, from A to B. And all by telling him you can do this in an hour, actually, but it's impossible because you have no idea. So in this case, you have 99% of the chances that you'll be late, and that, or even worse, that you'll never make it. So how do you estimate a project? And so the first thing is, it only works if the project is well defined. Just as I mentioned earlier, with detailed specifications and designs of the UI, with a written document that explains the business logic and all the rules that you need. And once you have those specifications, as you will see in the screen here, developers will break down the specifications in what we call user stories. So those user stories are usually chunks of work of 1 to 8 hours generally. And if it's bigger than 8 hours, it means that it can be broken down further, or that the understanding of the task is not enough and needs to be further clarified by the developer, and go to the product owner and ask him to explain further. And we know that this process of estimation takes a lot of time. Actually, this is one of the costliest processes in the company, but it saves so much time down the road that it's the absolute best way to start. And clients want this transparency. So what we deliver to them is a document of several pages with a lot of user stories that are, of course, organized by bigger functions of the project. And so, knowing how much time each feature takes allows you to better plan and prioritize how your application will be built. And the end result, it almost happens, is, of course, the amount of time will likely shock you. But it's normal because we always think things will go quicker than they actually do. So I see a few questions here as well, and I would like to also throw you one question, and then I will answer the next questions I see. And so, have you gone through this process? And if not, is there anything that prevented you from doing it? And if you haven't done it, have you encountered delays or other issues in your project that you think the estimation and breaking down of user stories could have helped you avoid? Stephen is asking a question. He says he's a founder with very low tech background, and he needs developers, but he has no budget to find the full size and full time team. And does it make sense to hire an outsourcing company? I've got some recommendations, but some of my contact thinks it's a good idea, while others say outsourcing is a disaster for a startup. What do you think? Well, yeah, I mean, it can be a good idea, but it can also be a disaster. And it is usually a good idea if you have a small budget, which exactly doesn't allow you to hire a full-time team on site, and outsourcing usually is a way to cut costs. But also you need to absolutely choose the right partner. And I think I will answer those two questions in more details in the coming slides. And if it's still unclear, Steve, let me know. So I'll carry on with the estimation and then probably answer the questions of Stephen. So basically, the estimation is really for alignment and prioritization of the project. So it besides forcing the breakdown of a complex project into smaller tasks, more manageable, it also helps the client to validate the features and understand that the project has been really well understood by the team. And as I mentioned earlier, most of the business people, they do not realize how much time each functionality have in mind really takes. So this also helps make smarter business decisions. And if they don't have access to this information, they will keep on throwing ideas. They're thinking like, oh, it's quickly done, do this, do that. But in reality, some of the features, okay, they might only take 20 hours, but some others, they can take 200 hours. But once you get the visibility of the product owner, then you can assign dollar amounts to the functionalities and decide what to remove and what to keep for later and what to do now. And in link to this estimation, once the team really understand well what has to be built, then this is when the architect can come in, and then we can have an architectural design of the proposed design to give to the client. So here you see a very simple example, but developers and the architect must really think about how they will put the system in place along with the architect in charge of the project. And this is why, along with the estimated dev time, your developers should produce an architectural diagram where they could explain to you how the systems are going to interact together. And this work of thinking of the architecture of the system needs to be done no matter what, and it's better to do it as early as possible Of course, it can be reviewed as time goes, but it has to be done pretty early in the process. So in the startups or in the companies where you develop software, did you plan the architectural design before? If not, have you struggled with it later? So maybe you can answer that question as well. And I have a question from Elias, who says that he has 2 ideas, and after a marketing study, these ideas seem very interesting and promising, and you're product and client oriented, and your answer is, what's the roadmap to start? And I think here is about trying to imagine the product you want to build. So it could start with building some requirements about what you need in pretty general terms. So lay down the features you want and try to think about how you want to build this product and how it should be used by the user. So maybe you can have a look at this document about the requirements and see if this is something that makes sense to you. And if not, then we can have a bit of a further discussion in private. I see there are a few more questions, and I will move a little bit further in the presentation because it might answer some of them. All right, so when do you need to actually ramp up your development team? So it's basically once you're ready with your requirements and you know how you should build your system, and how many hours of work are necessary. So this is really the time when you want to scale, maybe from 1 to 2 coding founders to a few developers and ship the MVP within 2 to 4 months. And that's where, speed is key here. So this is where we think that that's when the outsourcing can be most useful, because it can help you add more developers to your founding team. And once you're done and you've shipped your product, you can simply reduce the team size after the initial launch. And this is what a good provider should be able to do, is ramp up and ramp down when it's needed. And this is how we help also manage costs on the startup side. Because most of the startups, they need to ship a product really quickly, but they don't always have enough cash to maintain an entire team. And this is only when you've really validated and launched your MVP that you can go to investors and say, like, hey, look, this is what I've done. There's so much traction. This is the project I've done, the product I've done, and then raise more money with giving less of the equity out. And your competition also doesn't wait for you to be done, right, before they try to beat you. And when you're ramping up your team, you also should really watch out for project manager, just as I said before. Even as a big company, we try to avoid them as much as possible. So we need them when the clients are not technical, to make a buffer between the business and the developers, because sometimes communication mismatch can happen, and sometimes the business people just want to, I'm a business guy, so I do the same. I want to add crazy features and throw this to the devs and say, hey, can you do this? And they often say yes, and actually then it's really delaying your project. So and for the technical clients, we usually recommend them to directly developer, who probably will do 10 to 20% of his time as a project manager, which is anyways has to be done by speaking to the project manager if there's one. So we really notice that this makes projects much more efficient. And we've noticed that adding layers in the project can most of the time increase the risk of errors when relaying the specifications. So I'll jump again to a few questions. One from Roberto, who says, who is a non-tech founder and needs to write requirements. I have done it by my own, but when sent it to the developers, they told me that my requirements are too general and suggested to pay them for writing detailed requirements for 3,000. Should I do that? Well, it depends on the requirements. And so maybe you could send me your requirements if you want. I have an NDA that I could let you read and would sign if you want. But basically, that's something we do with our clients. When they send me something that is too general, then we go back to them and we say either they take my ebook and they try to do this by themselves, or we work with them and we explain to them in detail why it's going to cost 3,000, for example, how many hours of this person, what needs to be done, and then we clarify the output. So you have to understand exactly what is going to be done for these $3,000. And this is also usually how we work. So when we receive a project that is not well defined, we tell the client, stop, we can't give you a price for the project, but what we can do is give you a price to do these requirements, and then we can give you the price for your entire project at the end of this process, because we can't give a price if it's unclear for us. So I think your provider, in a way, if really the requirements are too general, asking you to work on them is a good approach. No provider should approach a project that is not clear. And then Saber is asking, what factors should a founder evaluate for their CTO? And I would say the main factor in technical terms is that the CTO will have to be coding and be able to mentor the team. And I will go into more details about this in a bit. And if the question is not completely answered, then let me know and I will go into more details. And another thing that is very important to do in your own projects is to use proper project management tools. So you need to stay organized and you need to use proper tools to manage the project. So in our case, we use Jira, and we even have a tool that automatically uploads user stories that we have created for our estimation in a specific in-house software that we've done for ourselves. And it matches the estimates and creates a task for each person in Jira, which is really like I would say the state of the art of the software management tools. And so like this, we can organize project phases. We can understand if we're on track compared to what we have estimated, understand what problems are arising, and to correct them as quickly as possible. And our clients and the project managers, they have constant access to this information. They also receive daily updates where they can check the discrepancies and understand where the team is struggling and fix the problems before it's too late. So don't just, I mean, of course, Skype and emails are important, but don't just use this to manage your requirements because it becomes really, really, really messy. So you have other tools such as Asana and even Trello that is free. That's pretty cool to manage not too complex projects. And another thing that is usually very underestimated as a function is the testing and the value of a professional tester. And so there's no tester. The founders will spend a lot more time doing testing, and while the functional testing can be well done by founders, a lot of other aspects can be missed. And so professional testers, they're usually typically trained for this task and add a lot of value in saving some development time and increasing the quality of the product that you're going to ship to your users. And in addition, testers, they use standardized practices to handle their tasks quickly. They write test cases, they execute those test cases, they write bug reports, and also, of course, in those bug reports, they explain to the developers how they can reproduce them. So this basically saves a lot of time for developers and a lot of costs for the founders. And we're talking about this MVP. You have to push your product to test users at some point. So you don't have to wait until your product is perfect, but it needs to be usable. Then once you push it to your users, you got to make sure that you watch them use your software and talk to them, understand what they do and why they do it and what's missing. And then that's when you fix it until you get real stickiness to your users. So depending on the business model, this means like whether they simply keep using your product or they maybe even willing to pay for using your software. And very important is that you shouldn't spend too much in marketing until you get something that really works. Otherwise, you just simply throw money out of the window, because once someone leaves because your product sucks, then that's money that has been wasted. And now, since you've been asking a little bit about outsourcing for some of you, I'll just share a few best practices. And this works outsourcing remotely, or this also works when you're working with a freelancer or even an agency that is like, next door. So if you decide to work with an outsourcing provider or freelancer in another country to reduce costs, you have to be very careful with the differences between the countries. And because there's a way to work with each culture, and if you don't understand that and manage different people the way you do with people in your own culture, you may not end up having the results you expect and even have misunderstandings, and then maybe enter some conflictual relationships. So you really better make sure that you understand who you're working with and their culture. And this, I put a link about this interesting book, When Cultures Collide. That is not a book that you should read completely, but take a few of the explanations of each culture that you're interested in knowing about. And have you experienced cultural issues in your project so far, and how did you work around them? Maybe you could share a little bit of that on how you've been able to manage those communication issues. And another thing that also is very, very important is to avoid fixed price projects in most cases. And just as Roberto was asking, the provider really wants to clarify stuff before he jumps into giving an estimation. And I know that most people like the idea to have a fixed cost project to mitigate the risks. But actually, with years of experience and ourselves and the majority of the industry, they have experienced that it works only in the cases where the project is extremely well defined. And this works, for example, for a small and very, very well defined mobile application. But for the rest, really, it rarely works because there's always someone losing. And so if, like in most cases it happens, the provider underestimates a project. So because of not enough requirements, they're not experienced enough, they don't have the right processes, they have misunderstandings on the specifications. And so once the provider has spent the amount of hours he said he would spend for that fixed amount of money, and the project is not finished, he's probably going to start cutting corners and decrease the quality of the product. And after a while, he probably will ask you for more money. Otherwise, he ditches the project. And this, of course, in some cases, this could kill your project, especially if they build stuff on their own framework. And I will explain this in a bit. And on the other hand, you're going to be the ones losing if the provider has overbilled you. He's going to earn a lot of money and you'll lose. This rarely happens, because if you do your job in evaluating the right provider and evaluate 3 or 4, you shouldn't do much more, because the analysis takes a lot of time. This shouldn't happen to you. Usually providers for fixed price, they will give you a super low price to get the project, and probably trick you later by asking more money because this and this and that, this was not specified, this is missing. And if you really want to have your product, at the end, they're going to say, well, you have to pay more, or then we stop working. And for this, I also have written a little ebook about how to evaluate software development firms that I can share with you. And in addition, in fixed price projects, the providers, they will try to limit collaboration with you because it takes a lot of time, and they want to avoid the client to try to add features along the way that are not in the initial scope. And this results, of course, in lots of flexibility, which is usually vital for a startup. So maybe you could also share if you had good or bad experiences with fixed cost projects, and maybe explain a little bit more, or if you have questions regarding this model as well. Excuse me, I'm losing my voice. And yeah, that's what I was mentioning before. Another thing is we see often is that the clients that come to us because they have problems with their current providers, they have built the entire system on a proprietary framework on their own. So this is a big issue because most of the time it's an outdated technology. It's very hard to work on these projects without having to restart from scratch because it's hard to take over a technology that just one provider knows and it's not widespread. So you have to make sure that you work on the technology your provider is proficient with, but that is also widespread with a striving community that is up to date, and that will also be very easy to hand over if you need to change providers. So that's one of the few steps to keep yourself more independent from a single provider or a freelancer. And another issue that we see sometimes, and that really sucks, is that some clients do not even have a complete control over the source code. And when the relationship with the provider turns sour, the providers just cut access to the latest source code. And if you never get the source code back, then it can take 2-3 hard months of work to salvage the project and delay the shipping of a product, and of course miss a lot of revenues from new features or even from shipping your MVP. So make sure that you have your own Bitbucket, GitHub, or GitLab, for example. I will jump to Mark's question, who was saying that I always thought that the main problem, that the problem in communication with developers was not about cultural differences, but just in general about different mindsets with tech people, even when coming from the same country. The main concern for us is that we will be dependent on the choices of outsourcing company as we have no expert in the team. And yes, even if we have an access to the source code, should we have an independent person who can come and check that everything is fine? Yeah, this could be a good idea. If you have no expert on the team, maybe you can have hire someone by the hour here and there just to check if everything is set up correctly. Never forget that every developer architect has their own idea of how things should work, so they're always pretty critical from what they see elsewhere. But I think you still can get a good feel about what they think if stuff is well set up or not. So just pick that external person with no real interest in stealing the project from your provider, but have to have honest feedback and can really add value. So maybe even a friend could help you out with this. And I will explain this a little bit again in more details with what the CTO as a founder should do. And what are the guys by the month is that you should put clauses to keep your team members on board. So because a lot of providers, they put their A team for you at the beginning of a project, and then they switch to more junior people. And if you're in a monthly contract, the provider really should commit to keep the developers on the project or compensate when they change for some reason. And we think that a real partner will work with you to develop the people on the project, make sure you get the most out of your relationship and the learning of the people. You can think about an extension of your own employees that stay on the long term with you, but simply not in the same office. And for that, you also have to make sure and understand what the provider does to make sure that they will do everything to reduce the attrition rate. In some regions of the world, the attrition rate is extremely high in companies that don't know how to keep keep their people on board as long as possible. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, with the tools that you yourself should have to keep your project organized, you have to make sure that your provider is also implementing daily and weekly reports and using a proper project management software, so it can be yours, give access to your stuff, or they can have their own system that they will share with you. Again, our pick is Jira because it's been a great software that we've been using for. I've been using it for more than 10 years, and this goes in the way of Mark. You always have to make sure that you have a high-level architect involved in the project. So if he's the architect of the provider, you have to make sure that he has the experience required for the job, and because bad architectural choices can create issues down the road. And if you're not sure about the skills of your architect, one of the providers, you have to hire someone a few hours to validate the architecture of the solution. And so this really has a small cost and can save you a lot of hassles down the road. And for us, one thing we really look at when we work with a startup, and even more importantly when we invest in one, we want to make sure that they have a coding CTO. So it's not a CTO that is just like boss people around. It's really a CTO that gets their hands dirty and understand the technologies the startup is working on. And so this adds a lot of value to the project and also to the startup when you want to raise funds, because they're going to ask you what's your technical team like, blah, blah, blah. And so it means that at least on paper, that the technology is key in-house. Okay, something happened, I don't know. Okay, I guess we're experiencing a little technical problem. Could you please type plus in the chat if you guys hear me? Okay, great. So I was talking about the CTO, and that it's adding a lot of value in the startup especially when you raise funds, right? It means that at least on paper the technology is mastered in-house. And what is very important is that this person should establish coding standards super early to make sure that everyone's coding the same way, which in turn, of course, facilitates onboarding and transitions for people and providers. And what is extremely key is that the coding CTO should do frequent code reviews with its team. And it's scientifically proven that it's the best investment you can do to increase the quality of your product, but also train your team as quickly as possible. And this is, I mean, extremely important point. It's also helping the team to stick together, share experiences, share points of views, and fast track their development. So it's a great coaching and mentoring tool. And a question is, how often does this happen in your company? Does your CTO or do your developers do this with each other? Another thing to look for is, mostly to understand, is that you always have to keep in mind the cost of delays for an MVP. So this is usually completely underestimated. So you need to be absolutely ruthless when removing features. Every day your product doesn't hit the market, it has a financial cost. It's missed revenues, the cost of paying your developers to get stuff done that doesn't get shipped, the cost of the unpaid founders, because they don't usually don't really get paid at the beginning, and and how about thinking about your competitors gaining traction while you're still in development and haven't shipped anything yet? So if you look at what Hoffman said, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. And really, this is what matters: is to be out quickly, still with a product that is not perfect, but works. I can give you like two examples that you can find in the article that I've shared here from Paul Graham, who says like do things that don't scale at the beginning. So don't try to work on something crazy complicated. For example, Stripe, which is a payment company, when they launched, they created a merchant account very quickly by doing stuff manually to see if they had traction. So basically, a user would go on the website, would sign up for a merchant account, and actually they were like faxing papers behind to create the merchant account. So nothing was automated. They only launched the automation months later when they had taken the market and crushed their competitors. And another example is that for Airbnb, the CEO, for the first 3 years, he was living at host places in California, and then he really became an advocate for his company and knew his clients super well. And I would also like to share a few inspirations that are, I think, pretty cool. You can look at the Blitzscaling series on YouTube that really are done by all the big unicorn startup founders in California. And if you don't, it's pretty long. So if you don't have the time to watch all of them, they're like the Blitzscaling 10 and 11 that are interesting in helping you understand how to build an evolving product and hiring developers over time. And there are also two books that I really loved and that really teach you a lot about entrepreneurship. Is the latest book about Elon Musk by Ashley Vance. That is really a great read. And one, I think, pretty crazy book to read and pretty funny, that shows you also all the crazy stuff that happened in startups. This Disrupted book. You will find the links in the chat as well, I think. And yeah, just to explain you how do we help startups with Arcanys Labs it's a program where we fast track the development of the startups, both with services and cash. So it's up to $200,000 of investment. Half of it is in cash and half of it is in services. And usually we start helping our clients if it's not yet done, or not clients, the startups we invest in, is the requirements. So basically with a UI, user experience designers, and sometimes business analysts. And then when this is done and we have the estimation done, then we start coding, right? So we have front-end developers, back-end developers. We test our products. In some cases, we have project managers when the technical team on the startup side is not so strong. And of course, to support all of this, we have a 24/7 infrastructure. We are Amazon certified, and we have people around the clock that really help the startups, making sure that their services are running smoothly. And of course, we also have customer support that can help e-commerce startups running in the background. And so basically, we're interested in getting stakes and helping startups scale super quickly to help release their stuff quickly to the market as well. And Guillaume shared the full link for the startup mistakes. Thank you very much. So that's a little bonus thing. It's a collation of stuff I've found online that really show the common startup mistakes, and I think it's a great way to, to also see what others are doing and how to start thinking about how to avoid doing these mistakes. And so the last slide, no, that's not the last, but that's the last before the last. I wanted to ask you if you have some more questions. I see that there's one more from Patrick that hasn't been answered that I will answer now. And if you have more, please feel free to write them in the chat, or you can also contact me later via email if you have more questions. So Patrick was asking, what if the provider constantly postpones the deadlines? We use the project management service to check, but deadlines are still an issue. Should we introduce a fine system? I think it really depends how you have structured your project and how you're delivering requirements, and where there is a problem. So you need to understand if it's a resource problem on their end, if it's a knowledge issue, how is their team set up, and so there's a lot of things to try to understand. And what we usually recommend is to have if you can, and that's not always the case, but have a really honest discussion with the provider. So maybe Patrick, we could also have a little call, a call. I think that would be better to see what is the situation with your current provider, and I'll ask you a bunch more questions to try to understand, and then maybe the fine system is something great, but it's also likely that if you put a fine system in place, they might ditch you and tell you to go see elsewhere. So you want to avoid that at all costs, of course. I hope this answered your question. Roberto has another question, and he's saying, he's asking me what the startups are interested in and what is the criteria of investing in acceleration. So we don't have we're pretty open in the startups we want to help, but basically they need to rely heavily on software development, because this is really where we can make a difference and help the startups. So if you don't rely on software, we're not really interested. Now the industry doesn't really matter. It's mostly about what is the idea, what is the market, what is the team behind it, how experienced it is, and do we feel like we can really make a difference. And if you're interested in knowing more, you can simply email me with a link to your startup idea, and then we can go into more details about the information we need to make a decision about your startup, if that's an area we're interested in. We have about 15 questions that we ask for a first assessment, which is the valuation, what you've done so far, what are your plans, how is your team structured, what is the valuation of the company. Maybe I've repeated some questions. If you want to know more in details about this, I'm happy to send you to give you more information. And Nelly has shared an interesting article. She's done the interview. It was pretty cool. It really explains what we do, and this is probably a good first step to get started with understanding what the labs is doing as well. And the last slide, I would like to thank you all for your participation. You have my email here. You can also check me on LinkedIn. You'll probably get more information. And I would also like to thank you, InnMind, for letting me do this and organizing the webinar. And then I will pass them Mike again. But before, there's one more question from Mark. And is it possible to do evaluation of the project at an early stage? Yes, we're looking at project at any stage, and we can tell you how we feel about it, and maybe give you some advice if we understand anything about your startup. Yes, even idea stage, always happy to have a look at. We can give you some directions maybe, or give you some links to maybe better understand how to develop your idea and how to get started. All right. And if you have more questions, feel free to email me. Feel free to email Nelly or Katarina from for InnMind. And well, thanks to everyone. See ya.
Okay, thank you, Frederic, for your very, very informative presentation. I hope everyone found this information useful. Yes, as Frederic has mentioned, you can write email either to us, or you can address directly Frederic here. We have already sent you how to contact him. You can find him on InnMind, and you can address to him there, or you can also use this mail address that you can see on the screen. And to finish this webinar, I would like just to invite you all to register on InnMind if you have your startup, if you have a project which is connected with innovations. On InnMind, you can find investors like Frederic and experts like Frederic as well. You can read lots of interesting information, publications. You can use free templates of the documents that we are developing with our partners, lawyers, and you can address to our team if you need some help in helping you to prepare a pitch or a business plan or any other information or documents that you need to present to the investor. And we also share with you, so I just ask the moderators now to share the link to the services, marketing services that we also help with. So this is one of our additional supports that we give to the startups on the early or not very early stage, depending on the needs that you have. And as well, our moderators now will share the link to the calendar with webinars that you will be able to join in the next weeks. Yes, we are organizing. So next week we are having a webinar about user experience, and you'll be able to listen to about the general things about designing your product. And in 2 weeks, there will be also a webinar about neuromarketing, so the connections in our brain and the products as well. So it will be like 2 webinars following one. They will be in connection. And in 3 weeks, you will have another webinar which will be more about the investment and communication with the investors. So once again, if you have any questions, you can address to us and write to email which the moderators will give you here, our support email, or you can write to us in chat as well. So thank you all for joining, and thank you all for being with us in this morning. For some people quite early, but it was great to see you.